Good morning, or afternoon or evening, wherever you are. Thank you for joining us today. I'm George Frampton, Distinguished Senior Fellow at the Atlantic Council, and I'll be moderating today's discussion. This event is on the record. We're live streaming to Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. So we encourage each one of you to post about today's discussion, share it on social media using the hashtag AC Energy, tag us at AC Global Energy. Those who are on Zoom can submit questions this morning in the Q&A portal located at the bottom of the Zoom screen at any time. We'll see if we can get to at least some of them before the end of today's session. We have a distinguished trio of speakers to discuss the upcoming Article 6 negotiations at the COP. Carbon trading is obviously not a new concept. The Kyoto Protocol envisioned a regime in which countries assume binding obligations to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, but could trade a portion of those requirements with other countries to lower the overall cost of global compliance. The Paris Accord, of course, substituted non-binding national targets, but Article 6 of the Accord still created a template for voluntary cooperation through carbon trading, both for trading portions of these voluntary nationally determined contributions among countries. That's Article 6.2, and in Article 6.4 through creation of special emissions reduction projects by private or public entities that could be used essentially as offsets to be traded. The goal of Article 6 and the hope of many is that carbon trading can itself not just cut the cost of compliance, but substantially increase overall global ambition. But there are also concerns that if we don't get the rules right for this new trading system, trading could provide loopholes and actually retard global progress. Finalizing the rules has proven challenging. Differences on important details remain. Heading into COP26, the UNFCCC has designated the ministers of Norway and Singapore to lead this effort. And today, following a welcome by Her Excellency Grace Fu, Minister for Sustainability and the Environment for the Republic of Singapore, we'll have the chief negotiators from each of these countries, Norway and Singapore, Henrik Hallgrim Eriksson, Chief Climate Negotiator for the Kingdom of Norway, and Joseph Teo, Chief Negotiator for Climate Change for the Republic of Singapore, talk about the importance of this challenge and how they're going about it. And then we'll also hear a view from the US from Molly Peters Stanley, Article 6 negotiator for the US Department of State. But first, we're going to hear a welcome from Minister Fu.
Greetings and a warm welcome to the Singapore-Norway Climate Dialogue organized by the Atlantic Council. Article 6 is the only outstanding item yet to be agreed in the Paris Agreement. It has been almost 6 years since we adopted the Paris Agreement, but we have not reached a resolution on Article 6 rules. In that time, the severity of the climate emergency has deepened around us, and the need for climate mitigation and adaptation actions grows greater. The IPCC Working Group 1 report has warned us that unless there are immediate, rapid, and large-scale reductions in greenhouse gas emissions, limiting warming to 1.5 degrees C or even 2 degrees C would be beyond reach. To succeed in our efforts, we need every tool in the toolbox. If we get it right, Article 6 can facilitate higher ambition in mitigation and adaptation. Well-functioning carbon markets can unlock financing for green projects, spur innovation, bring down technology costs, and enable us to harness green growth opportunities. The International Emissions Trading Association has estimated that an effective carbon market could save up to US $250 billion a year in costs for climate action by 2030. Market opportunities for global emissions trading could also reach more than US $800 billion by 2050. There are downsides if we fail to reach an agreement. While countries can start to cooperate on carbon markets instruments today, we risk having different accounting systems applied to different mechanisms, which could result in the erosion of environmental integrity. Without the rules in place this year, we will also have further delays on the revenue for the Adaptation Fund, which is vital for supporting developing countries in their adaptation challenges. This is why we must succeed in Glasgow. The multilateral rules-based system of global climate action that we, the world, collectively established in Paris in 2015 rests on us completing this outstanding work. My co-facilitator, Minister Svenning Rotevatn from Norway, and I have been given the difficult task of co-facilitating ministerial consultations on this key issue. It is a heavy responsibility placed on Singapore and Norway, but we will do our best to advance progress with the support of all parties. I'm pleased to share that the consultations so far have been constructive. There is clearly a common will to make progress and work for a deal that is credible and balanced in Glasgow. But we are not there yet. There are still divergent interests and concerns at play on several issues, which distinguished panelists will elaborate later. We heard clearly from parties that a balanced package is necessary to land Article 6, considering the subsections as a whole and other issues outside Article 6. We need to address all concerns in an inclusive way, consider the needs of the parties fully. We need to find creative solutions that accommodate the needs of the parties, with all parties prepared to adjust their positions, while maintaining confidence on the integrity and quality of the entire architecture. Clearly, there is still a lot of work ahead of us with very little time before COP26 to resolve these issues. I therefore welcome this timely dialogue. It provides us an opportunity to listen and exchange ideas on how we can all work together to arrive at a strong outcome on Article 6. The teams from Norway and Singapore will be listening carefully and taking copious notes on all suggestions and views. We look forward to your continued engagement and support. I wish you all a fruitful and meaningful discussion.
Minister Fu, thank you very much for setting the stage for our conversation. And I'll turn to our virtual panel, starting with Henrik Algrim Eriksson. Henrik, it sounds like you've got a lot to do in the next couple of months. Over to you.
Thank you, and we certainly do. Greetings to all. Thank you to the Atlantic Council for hosting the meeting, and thanks to the participants for joining. And not least, thank you to Minister Fu, who so clearly laid out the severity of the threats, the possibilities of cooperation, and the consequences of us failing to agree on and adopt rules for Article 6 at COP26. The key word after the IPCC report that was presented in August is ambition. We're clearly not cutting our emissions enough, and we are not doing enough on adaptation, and we also need to increase support for climate action. These are all themes for Glasgow, for the COP26. And cooperation is important for increased ambition. In general, our cooperation is through implementing the Paris Agreement on all parts of it. Through cooperation, we can advance faster and go further and even save costs. We're now in a moment where we are all have or should have enhanced our national determined contributions, the NDCs, under the Paris Agreement. The IPCC report clearly said that strong and rapid cuts are necessary if we are to keep 1.5 degrees within reach. So it's important that those who have not enhanced their NDCs do so. In the long run, balancing emissions and removals is a perspective that the IPCC report draws up. That's where we need to go to such a balance, to net zero. And not all countries can become carbon neutral within their own territories. So cooperation can play a role here, in that those who have greater potential for being carbon neutral or even carbon negative can team up with others. Indeed, the point of departure for Article 6 in the Paris Agreement is to allow for higher ambition in parties mitigation and adaptation action. Cooperating on implementing NDCs gives a strong possibility for increased ambition. The rules, which we are now trying to get agreement on in Glasgow, must facilitate the Paris requirements of no double counting and high environmental integrity. As was said in the introduction, if we don't get it right, we may create loopholes and slow progress. In particular, also, a very practical consequence, the central mechanism that's being established under so-called 6.4 needs a decision to become operational. Various forms of cooperation are already underway. What's at stake is agreed and common rules for accounting, reporting, and review. Such rules would facilitate that we avoid double counting and ensure a high level of environmental integrity, which is already part of which is set out as rules in the agreement itself. These are elements that would create trust, enable more cooperation, and a higher ambition. The negotiations also include a framework for non-market-based cooperation, and making this operational will also hopefully help to advance other forms of cooperation that are more common than those involving the carbon market. So this is also part of the negotiations. Even if the greatest potential for Article 6 cooperation may lie in the decades ahead, a decision on the rules in Glasgow will lay the foundation for sound cooperation. The challenge is to get the long-term structures right from the start. We've tried to get agreement on the rules for almost 6 years. The COPs in Katowice and Madrid advanced the issues, but we didn't succeed in landing them there. So we need to get it done now. In the light of the difficult negotiations and in light of failing to agree at the earlier COPs, the UK asked Minister Grace Fu of Singapore and Minister Sveinung Rotevatn to facilitate consultations in order to try to help move things forward. Of course, parties, the countries, will decide on the outcome. Our role is to do our best to assist. Singapore and Norway, we have different national circumstances, but we're both small countries that seek a well-functioning international framework. Norway also has a long practical experience through the Kyoto Protocol of cooperating with other countries on emission reductions, and also in raising our own ambition as a result of such cooperation being possible. We hope that parties see us as facilitating an outcome that everyone can be part of and everyone can be proud of. We take the role seriously, and we sincerely hope we can find solutions with higher environmental integrity that are workable for all. My colleague, Joseph Theo, will elaborate more on the challenges in the negotiations and the outstanding issues. But I hope this was a useful introduction to the challenge that is facing us. Thank you.
Henrik, thank you. And we'll go over to Joseph, Singapore. Joseph, it's yours.
Thank you, and a very good morning and afternoon and evening to colleagues and friends joining us here today, both in the US and from around the globe. I'd just like to take the opportunity to thank the Atlantic Council for organizing this timely climate dialogue, and everyone for taking precious time out of your busy schedule to participate and engage on this very important issue. My minister and fellow panelists, Hendrik, have just impressed upon us the urgency to make progress at COP26 and the gravity of what is at stake if we fail to finalize Article 6. Clearly, there's much to do with very little time left before Glasgow to get them done. Now, Article 6 has 3 operating paragraphs, as many of you would know, Article 6.2, 6.4, and 6.8. Parties have made important progress over the years across these 3 sub-articles, including through comprehensive workshops organized by the Substar Chair. While parties have made good progress on understanding each other's positions, there remain divergences on key issues. Parties are pressing ahead on the technical tracks to examine sticking points that need more technical examination, such as the need for overall mitigation of global emissions, or what we call in the negotiations OMGE, and balanced treatment for non-market approaches, just to name a few. On the political track, the UK COP President designated has tasked the ministerial co-facilitators, my minister and the minister from Norway, to focus the informal ministerial consultations on 3 key outstanding issues that parties consistently identified as requiring political guidance to have a chance at concluding Article 6 in a balanced way. The first key outstanding issue revolves around potential double claiming of units generated by Article 6.4 mechanism. While all parties acknowledge the importance of avoiding double claiming, views differ on where emission reductions not covered by the scope of the host party's NDC or climate pledge result in double claiming when used to achieve another party's NDC. Some parties are of the view that there is no double claiming, as these emission reductions are outside of the host party's NDC and hence only count towards the buyer's NDCs. While others see the need for corresponding adjustment to avoid creating a loophole that disincentivizes parties from moving towards economy-wide NDCs. The second key outstanding issue revolves around whether units generated before 2020 should be eligible for use to meet NDC targets in a post-2020 period. Parties which have invested heavily in carbon offset activities under the Kyoto Protocol make the case for allowing these credits to remain valid for use post-2020 to preserve confidence of existing market actors. While other parties express the need to protect overall NDC ambition, especially with all signs pointing to us severely falling short of meeting the Paris temperature goals. As these credits did not represent emission reductions, allowing their use post-2020 would hinder overall ambition and erode confidence in the carbon markets. The final key outstanding issue which we have been asked to look at is around how Article 6 could support adaptation action through generating finance for adaptation, particularly via Article 6.2. Again, while all parties agree on the importance of predictable adaptation finance, they were divided on how Article 6 should contribute to this. Proponents call for mandatory share of proceeds for Article 6.2, where a small fee is imposed on internationally transferred emission reductions to generate revenue for the adaptation fund. As mandatory share of proceeds will apply to Article 6.4, they argue it should similarly apply to Article 6.2 to maintain parity and avoid potential disincentive for using Article 6.4. Opponents, on the other hand, argue that there is no legal basis for such a provision and that it would not always be workable given the diverse possible types of cooperation under 6.2. Levying a mandatory share of proceeds on Article 6.2 could even discourage mitigation action. Clearly, there is much divergence, as you may note from my explanation so far, and the work ahead is really, we have our work cut out for us. And we need to double our pace at finding bridging solutions. Fortunately, there is a clear common will to make progress and work for a credible and balanced deal in Glasgow. We are also not starting from scratch, as we have the Madrid text to build from. The Madrid text do provide some potential solutions. While parties acknowledge that these are not perfect solutions, there is some willingness to discuss and study their feasibility and determine the risks involved if such solutions are considered seriously. For example, with respect to proposals to provide time-bound flexibilities where host parties could opt out of corresponding adjustment for emission reductions that are outside of their NDC, we need further technical work to examine what a reasonable duration for this flexibility could look like, and what additional safeguards are needed to limit double claiming, to reduce the risk of perverse incentives against the expansion and progression of NDCs, and to increase transparency. On carryover of pre-2020 units, some parties call for the limited use of pre-2020 units by imposing vintage restrictions such that only units after a certain date could be used under Article 6.4. Other approaches were also raised, including putting pre-2020 units into a reserve to avoid flooding the market and only releasing them in times of supply shortages. However, more technical work is needed to better understand the potential impact of the different options, including how many pre-2020 units might be eligible, if at all, under different scenarios, and the resulting impact on environmental integrity. On adaptation finance, there is a proposal of voluntary encouragement coupled with mandatory reporting on adaptation finance in Article 6.2. We are looking at other avenues also for adaptation finance under the adaptation and finance tracks to provide genuine, predictable, and steady adaptation finance to support developing countries. However, these proposals do not enjoy full backing from the parties. From the ministerial consultations in July, which both my minister and the minister from Norway convened, they have heard very clearly from parties that compromises may not be found only within specific issues, but should be agreed within a broader package where trade-offs and impacts can be assessed more holistically in the context of the wider work on ambition, transparency, accountability, and support. In other words, we need to find a balanced and credible package across all different issues if we wish to land Article 6. No simple feat. This requires more work and tight coordination across the various tracks, ample goodwill, and trust among parties to pull this off. As co-facilitators, our ministers from Norway and Singapore would be guided by the views and inputs by all parties, as this is a party-driven process, and the principles of safeguarding environmental integrity to achieve the Paris Agreement goals. We look forward to the continued engagement and support of all parties as we work towards COP26. And I'm very honored and happy to present with you some of the issues that we are tackling in the ministerial consultations today. As my minister have mentioned, both my teams as well as the team from Norway will be listening to you as much as you are interested to listen to us to see how we can build a strong, inclusive outcome on Article 6 that works to enhance ambition on adaptation and mitigation while protecting environmental integrity. I thank you for your interest and attention, and I hand over the floor back to George. Thank you.
Thank you, Joseph. Very concise summary of the major outstanding issues and positions. I have a question about adaptation finance, but I want to turn to Molly Peter Stanley first for comments, and just remind listeners that if you're on Zoom, you can submit questions in the Q&A box below. Molly, thank you for joining us today too.
Thank you so much, George. I'll begin by thanking the Atlantic Council for organizing this discussion and for inviting us to comment on the progress that parties are making toward a successful Article 6 outcome in Glasgow. I'm on the US State Department's climate negotiations team, where I'm the lead technical negotiator on Article 6. Lucky me. I also work on other international carbon market-based measures, such as the international aviation sector's global carbon offsetting system. Before touching on some of my fellow panelists' remarks, just a quick word about US engagement and expectations for these negotiations. This year, our team has been working diligently with a wide range of parties to secure an outcome on Article 6 this year. And there are at least two reasons for our work on this issue. First, we recognize that we must reach net zero emissions globally by 2050. And international cooperative approaches through carbon market-based measures, cooperation on carbon pricing, public or private performance-based payments, what have you, these measures can make important contributions to that end if done right. Second, we do foresee that US-based businesses will continue to engage in international carbon markets as implementers, as buyers, as investors, as they have for decades now. So we have a strong interest in ensuring that we have clear international guidance to ensure that market-based actions are credible, transparent, and aligned with the goal to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees. Securing the right outcomes on Article 6, and we put emphasis on the word right, we think this is critical for the future ambition of the Paris Agreement to support keeping those Paris temperature goals within reach. In line with what Henrik and Joe have already highlighted, this year parties are focused on proposed solutions for some of the most challenging, outstanding issues in Article 6 negotiations. Our team, like many other parties, is focused in particular on 4 key topics. First, on how parties will account for mitigation outcomes, including emissions reductions or removals. where these outcomes are internationally traded. And here, as others have explained, the focus of this guidance is on avoiding a situation where more than one country or authorized entity takes credit for the same single ton of emissions reductions. The risk of getting this wrong is that what the world thinks parties are achieving under the Paris Agreement or under other authorized systems versus what the atmosphere is actually seeing. These things would not be in sync. As Joe explained, there are also discussions about whether and to what extent to carry over into the Paris universe emissions reductions that were certified under the Kyoto Protocol in the last decade, in the prior decade. We agree with what he summarized as the risks of this decision, namely that it takes pressure off of parties and private markets to finance and implement new climate actions in this decade. Third, at a technical level, we're focused on a design of the new carbon crediting mechanism under the Paris Agreement, that it would be designed in a way that captures lessons learned in carbon offset markets over the last several decades at this point. Sometimes these are lessons learned the hard way. And including that the new mechanism would avoid well-known pitfalls in the design of these certification systems, and ideally would increase the effectiveness of the activities that are being implemented on the ground and certified. We hope that the Paris Agreement mechanism will be a model that other independent certification and crediting systems will view as a model and not as a cautionary tale. And finally, parties are considering how their cooperation under Article 6 can raise their ambitions related to climate adaptation. And here, the US underscores our commitment to supporting climate finance generally and adaptation finance in particular, but also our view that adaptation finance is an issue that's most effectively addressed in the finance components of a COP26 outcome. On each of these issues, we do see some options for resolving discussions that seem to represent progress toward compromise. But we also see options on the table that seem to compromise on atmospheric integrity. Those solutions we wouldn't be in a position to accept, not if we want Article 6 decisions that are broadly supported, and we're not alone in that view. We look forward to working with colleagues to ensure that we have both a strong and robust response to these issues and an outcome on Article 6 that supports our efforts to rapidly reduce emissions around the world. Thanks, George. Back to you.
Molly, thank you, and thank all of you. For any of you, but maybe I can start with Henrik and Joseph. It's, as you mentioned, built into the Article 6 is this notion of increasing ambition overall, not just having a trading system that reduces costs and therefore makes everyone's ability to achieve their targets, their NDC, more likely, but actually increases the total amount of emissions. And yet that places quite a bit of stress on trading, first of all, because you have to have not only avoid double counting, but have less than double counting. Somebody creates a project that does 10 tons of emissions reductions, but somehow only the trading party gets 8 of the 10 because you want to increase total ambition. And then second, if some sort of tax on trading, at least under Article 6.2, is going to be used to fund ambition, you're also placing that stress on normal trading. How is all of this, the idea that there's got to be a net increase in ambitions from the trading system, it by itself creates even more emissions reductions? Is that a realistic eventuality, and how do you address the problems of making this system, this regime, do more than perhaps the Kyoto trading program was ever really envisioned to achieve? Or am I getting it wrong? Let me pick on Joe first. Any response to that?
Thank you, George. I was hoping Hendrik would go first, but thank you for redirecting the question to me. My quick answer to you is there are a number of issues that we are trying to deal with in Article 6. And the primary concern, my sense, speaking to a number of delegations across among all the different parties, is that the primary concern and key objective of getting this Article 6 right is really ensuring environmental integrity. There is recognition that cooperative mechanisms under Article 6, as Molly and others have highlighted, are meant to facilitate cooperation so that you can help all parties achieve higher ambition at much lower costs. But there are other views who feel, and so here the key issue at stake is really getting the reporting and the accounting right. And I think Molly did highlight that the key issue really is to make sure that there is no double claiming by countries or entities using any cooperative mechanisms in Article 6. So really the key issue at hand for us as negotiators is getting this right at the outset. If we can get this right, we can then position Article 6 to be used as a mechanism to raise parties' ambitions further. So I think that's the second order of business, so to speak. And the third order of business among some other parties, constituency that I belong to, have also proposed, and this is an issue that the ministerial consultations haven't yet looked at very closely, is this issue of OMGE, which is a further cutting, further haircut to the activities that take place under Article 6 with the aim of actually spurring even higher ambition among parties that participated in Article 6. There is no agreement yet on this particular mechanism or issue. We still have to discuss this among parties. I just wanted to flag that this is another issue, another proposal by a group of parties, a number of parties actually, who have suggested this as a way to raise ambition. I'm not sure if I'm answering your questions. I know from a business perspective, and coming from Singapore, the business perspective and the operational efficiency of the system that we design under Article 6 is one of the considerations, but it is not the only considerations at play in the negotiations. And the challenge for us as negotiators and as parties is to try to do the trade-offs between all these considerations and find that sweet spot, so to speak, so that we all can work together, find an inclusive and credible, strong outcome that can raise ambition as well as maintain high standards of environmental integrity. So that's my take, and I hope I did address your question a bit in a long way. Thanks.
You did, thank you. There's a question from a listener who says that as countries are, really looking at the path to net zero and net zero emissions, a huge part of that challenge is going to be supply chain, sector-based. And his question is whether the current debate about Article 6 rules, at least I read the question, takes account enough of a sector-based approach, industrial decarbonization, transportation. Those don't necessarily seem to be the most obvious first candidates for trading. Any thoughts about how this relates to sector-based deep decarbonization, trading systems? Henrik, let me ask you.
Yeah, yeah. It's not an easy question to answer, and I think it does the approach of Article 6 is not sector based in that it can encompass cooperation in all parts of the NDCs. Since there was a reference to net zero and there's of course there's a potential. It's important to also galvanize cooperation that can achieve contributions in the long run to taking CO2 out of the atmosphere, which may imply technologies such as CCS, but also the more simple and nature-based solution of CO2 uptake in trees. So, but it will be up to the market to have demand and also to generate cooperation in the different sectors, also both through governments and also the private sector. So I think it in the way it takes it into account without trying. It's not part of the negotiations that the sector goes in, out, and so on. So it is an inclusive approach. So it doesn't really put the divide. Well, it will encompass cooperation in all sectors if everything works well. Of course, there may be certain challenges, and for example, it's particularly important to have high standards of environmental integrity in some sectors like forests because.
Yeah.
Of,
Henrik, let me ask you, if I can ask you that question. We only have a couple minutes left, but
okay, sorry.
Quickly, what are the implications for Norway's for REDD+ forest protection credits? Well, Norway a leader in developing a higher quality system for that.
Not that much, because, and I think that's a good question because it points to the links to climate finance. So. Because you may have an approach of results-based payments, and where you use some of the approaches that are particular to REDD, but without having any transfer of ITMOs, and so REDD+ cooperation is an example of where we provide support for NDC implementation, but the NDC implementation is in the host country itself. So it's related, but in this case, it's more linked to climate finance. And the LEAF cooperation, which some of you may know, and which the US, UK, and Norway was engaged in developing, but is linked to private sector mobilization, is also mostly based on financing implementation of the NDCs, which stay in the host country. So it doesn't. All cooperation doesn't have to involve the transfer of units and things. Thanks.
The Atlantic Council's done a couple programs on the LEAF. Mm-hmm. So we are out of time, and thank you all for joining us today for this conversation. Especially to our panelists. I'd also like to thank John Odegaard Hansen from Norway, Teresa Silo, JJ Fang, Lauren Holland and Roger Morales, and Kelsey Foran from the Council for their work today. If you'd like to rewatch this or share the stream with a colleague, you can find a recording on the Atlantic Council website and on our YouTube channel. And if you enjoyed today's session, look out for more events to come in our Raising Ambitions, The Road to Glasgow series. You can also join us October 28 at 8 p.m. for a program called The Biden Administration's Climate Policy and Implications for the Asia Energy Transition, which is an event we'll do in partnership with the Singapore International Energy Week More information and registration can be found on SIEW's website. Thanks again to our trio of panelists for giving us their time and wisdom today. And everyone who's listening, have a great rest of your day. Thank you.